You've probably heard the story of Joseph and his amazing coat of many colors, right? It's one of those classic tales of dreams, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. But what if I told you the real story? The one that explains why everything went down the way it did is so much darker, so much more complicated. It's a story about a family that was completely tearing itself apart long before that famous coat was ever even a thought.
So let's really get into it. The question we're tackling today is this. Why did Joseph's brothers actually hate him so much? I mean, with a passion that led them to do the unthinkable. Because, you see, the coat, the dreams, those were just the sparks. The real problem was the massive pile of kindling that had been stacking up for decades, all soaked in some serious family dysfunction.
So where does the Bible kick this whole part of the story off? Well, you might be surprised. It doesn't start with a dream or a coat. It starts with a family that is already, shall we say, simmering with tension.
Right out of the gate, we meet a 17-year-old Joseph basically acting as a snitch. He's out in the fields with some of his brothers, specifically the sons of the servant wives Bilhah and Zilpah. And what does he do? He runs right back to Dad, Jacob, with a bad report about them. Now, you gotta understand, this act of tattling, it wasn't the cause of all the drama. Oh no, it was just a symptom of a family that was already cracked right down the middle.
And to really understand why they were so broken, we have to hit rewind. We've got to go back a whole generation, because the seeds of this hatred, they were planted in the very foundation of Jacob's family, a marriage that was built on a complete and total lie.
So here's the core of the deception. Jacob works for 7 long years for the woman he is absolutely in love with, Rachel. But on his wedding night, his father-in-law, Laban, pulls the ultimate switcheroo. He tricks Jacob and gives him Rachel's older sister, Leah, instead. So, the woman Jacob got was not the woman he'd earned. His heart belonged to Rachel. Leah was an obligation, forced on him through trickery.
And I mean, this wasn't just some small mix-up. Jacob had poured years of his life, all of his love, all of his hope, into the promise of marrying Rachel. To wake up and find Leah there instead, it was a profound, painful swindle. And that resentment, that feeling that Leah was the woman who wasn't Rachel, it never really left him.
Now, this deep resentment Jacob felt, it wasn't just some private feeling he kept bottled up. Not at all. It actually hardened into a rigid and frankly cruel social structure right inside his own house. He basically created a power ranking for his 4 wives.
Okay, just look at this breakdown for a second. It is absolutely astonishing. At the top, no surprise, is Rachel, the beloved wife. But check out rank number 2. After Rachel dies, you'd think Jacob would finally elevate Leah, right? His first wife, the mother of his firstborn son. But nope, he elevates Rachel's servant, Bilhah, to the number 2 spot. Leah, the unloved wife, gets pushed down to 3rd place, just 1 step above her own servant. Can you even imagine the daily humiliation of that?
And here is such a crucial piece of the puzzle. While the men in this story, Jacob and his father-in-law Laban, might have seen the servant wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, as just low-ranking or even useless, the source material tells us that in the grand scheme of things, they were hidden treasures. They were destined to become the mothers of entire nations of Israel. Their value was immense, even if the family patriarch completely failed to see it.
And you know what happens in a toxic system like that, right? The pain, the hierarchy, the resentment, it doesn't just stay with the parents. That poison seeps down. It drips directly onto the next generation. These kids were literally born into conflict.
So Leah's constant pain, this feeling of always being disrespected and second best, it had a huge effect on her kids. The text says she literally poisoned the spirit of her firstborn Reuben against his own father. She basically pulled her son into her own marital beef and set him up to fight a battle that was never his to begin with. So Reuben, trying to be the hero for his mom, comes up with this just disastrous and frankly very childish plan. His logic, if you can even call it that, is completely twisted. He thinks, okay, if I defile Bilhah, the woman my dad has elevated, maybe then he'll have no choice but to go back to my mom, Leah. It's just a desperate, tragic attempt to fix a deep emotional wound with a terrible, destructive act.
And this quote right here just says it all. You do not force love. Period. Reuben was just a boy meddling in this incredibly complex, painful history that he couldn't possibly understand. And, as we know, his actions would end up costing him everything, including his birthright.
So what you get from all this is a literal caste system among the sons. It's wild. At the very top, you've got your first-class citizens, Joseph, the son of the beloved wife Rachel. Then you have the second-class sons, the sons of Leah. And then at the very bottom, third class, are the sons of the servants, Bilhah and Zilpah. They're all brothers, sure, but they are absolutely not equals.
I mean, can you even imagine the psychological damage? The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah literally grew up watching their own mothers act as servants to the other wives in the house. This kind of environment just breeds low self-esteem, a deep-seated feeling of being second-rate. And eventually, all that hurt and shame would curdle into a fierce, burning resentment aimed squarely at the living symbol of their oppression, Joseph.
So you have all this simmering anger, this inherited pain, this rigid family hierarchy. The whole thing is a pressure cooker just waiting to explode. All it needed was one final push, one last public act of favoritism that nobody could possibly deny.
And wouldn't you know it, Jacob delivers. He gives them two. First, the famous coat of many colors. Now this wasn't just a nice sweater, it was a royal dress, a kingly garment that screamed, "I am different and I am better than you." And then as we saw, Joseph brings home that evil report, basically setting himself up as his father's little spy. For the brothers, these were the final straws.
And in that moment, all that resentment hardens into a terrifying cold resolution. They stop seeing Joseph as just the annoying favored brother. Now, he's a spy. He's a threat to their very freedom. The incredible love Jacob had for Joseph felt like a direct attack on them. And their conclusion was chillingly simple. We got to get rid of you.
So when you put all of these pieces together, when you see the whole messy picture, you realize the real story here. This isn't just about some simple sibling rivalry. It's a powerful case study in how dysfunction and favoritism can echo and even amplify down through generations.
So here's the bottom line, the most important takeaway from all of this. The brothers' violent, shocking hatred of Joseph wasn't really about a fancy coat or some strange dreams. No, it was the inevitable, explosive climax of a family system that was broken from the start by deception, defined by a cruel hierarchy, and totally poisoned by decades of inherited resentment and pain. The coat just made it impossible for anyone to pretend otherwise.
And that kind of leaves us with a pretty big thought, doesn't it? This ancient story feels incredibly, well, modern. It really forces us to ask, in our own lives, in the conflicts we see all around us, how often is the thing we're fighting about, that so-called final straw, not the real story at all, but just the tiny, visible tip of a much deeper, older, and more painful iceberg hidden beneath the surface?